30 seconds outside Atlanta, the Georgia you think you know disappears. The highway ends. The Spanish moss starts. The roads get narrower, the trees get taller, and somewhere in the silence between the pines, there are places that the people who live here won't talk about in full sentences. They whisper about them. They warn you not to go near them at night, and when you ask why, they look at you the way people look at someone who just asked a question that has an answer they'd rather you didn't hear. In this video, we're going inside 10 of those places, a hospital so enormous it was once the largest in the entire world, with 25,000 unmarked graves in the fields around it. A Carnegie family mansion burned to the ground and left to the wild horses. And the one we're saving for last, a Civil War mill that Union soldiers tried to erase from history and couldn't. Subscribe. Let's go. Number 10. Resaca Confederate Cemetery, Gordon County. The battlefield. Nobody finished burying. In May of 1864, a two-day battle raged through the hills of Gordon County as Union General Sherman pushed his army south toward Atlanta. The Battle of Resaca killed thousands. After the smoke cleared, the dead were buried where they fell, in fields, in ditches, in makeshift graves marked with whatever wood was nearby. A woman named Mary Green couldn't accept that. She gathered the scattered Confederate dead from the surrounding farmland and established a private cemetery on her family's property. For years, she maintained it herself. A Confederate veterans organization eventually took over, and the cemetery was gradually formalized. Today, Resaca Confederate Cemetery holds over 400 graves. Many have no names, just unknown Confederate soldier carved into stone. The iron fence around it is original. Spanish moss hangs from the oaks above the headstones. The town of Resaca around it has nearly vanished. A few buildings, a railroad track, and fields where the battle was fought. The cemetery is the last thing fully standing. And it is extraordinarily quiet in a way that battlefields always are, as if the ground itself remembers what happened and hasn't decided what to do with the memory. Number 9. Porterdale Cotton Mill, Newton County. The mill town that forgot to disappear. On the Yellow River in Newton County, a mill town called Porterdale once ran entirely on cotton. The mill was built in the 1890s, and within years, an entire community had grown around it. Company housing, a company store, a company church, a company school. Workers were born in Porterdale, worked in Porterdale, and many died without ever spending significant time anywhere else. The mill ran for nearly a century. When it finally closed in the late 20th century, the town didn't empty the way most mill towns do. The buildings stayed, the workers' houses stayed, still occupied by some families, abandoned by others. The mill itself, a long red brick building along the river, was left standing. Today, Porterdale is one of those towns that exists in between. Some of it has been redeveloped, some of it is being redeveloped. And in the middle of all of it, the old mill sits on the Yellow River, its brick walls still solid, its windows looking out over water the machines used to run on. The company town that owned every building and every paycheck is gone. What it left behind is still figuring out what it is now. Number 8. Etowah, Indian Mounds, Cartersville. The city that disappeared before Europeans arrived, before Cartersville existed, before Georgia existed, before any European explorer had seen the interior of this continent. There was a city here. The Etowah site was one of the most important political and religious centers in the entire southeastern United States. Between approximately 1000 and 1550 AD, a civilization we call the Mississippian culture built an urban center on the banks of the Etowah River that housed up to several thousand people. They built 6 earthen mounds, the largest standing over 60 feet tall, that served as platforms for temples, council houses, and the homes of their leaders. They developed complex trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. They created some of the most sophisticated artwork produced in pre-Columbian North America. And then they left. Sometime in the mid-1500s, the city was abandoned. The exact reason is unknown. Disease, possibly brought inland from contact with Spanish coastal explorers, is one theory. Political disruption is another. Whatever happened, the Etowah site was empty when European settlers arrived in Georgia. The mounds they found had no living inhabitants, and nobody in the surrounding region could explain who had built them. Today, Etowah Indian Mounds is a Georgia State Historic Site. You can climb the main mound, 6 stories of compacted earth, and look out over the river valley that an entire civilization once called home. The museum holds artifacts that will rearrange your understanding of what history means in Georgia. Most visitors to Cartersville drive past the highway sign and keep going to the outlet malls. Number 7. Jekyll Island Amphitheater, Glynn County, the open-air theater, the island swallowed. In the 1970s, someone decided that Jekyll Island needed an outdoor amphitheater. Jekyll Island, which had been owned entirely by a private club of America's wealthiest families from 1886 to 1947, where the Rockefellers, Morgans, Pulitzers, and Vanderbilts wintered in cottages that were actually mansions, was now a state park. A public amphitheater seemed like a reasonable addition. It was built. It was used for performances. And then, quietly, with no dramatic announcement, it stopped being maintained. The Georgia humidity and subtropical vegetation did what they do to everything left alone in this state. The seats cracked, the stage deteriorated, the trees moved in. Today, the Jekyll Island Amphitheater ruins sit in a clearing on the island, being consumed by the coastal forest. The concrete curves of the seating area are still recognizable. Vines cover the backstage structures. It is not officially open, but it is not officially closed either. Visitors who find it describe it as one of the strangest places on the island, a 1970s ruin on an island full of Gilded Age ruins, all of them being slowly reclaimed by the same Georgia coast that claimed everything here eventually. Number 6. Horton House, Jekyll Island, the oldest building in Georgia, left to stand alone. We're halfway through, and the next 4 entries are the ones locals genuinely don't discuss. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us. On the southern end of Jekyll Island, surrounded by salt marsh and ancient live oaks, there is a building that has been standing since 1743. Not 1843. Not 1943. 1743. William Horton was one of General James Oglethorpe's officers, one of the founders of the Georgia colony, and he built this house from tabby, a material made by burning oyster shells and mixing the lime with sand, shells, and water. The result is a concrete-like substance that, in the right conditions, lasts for centuries. Horton's house has lasted for nearly 3 of them. Horton was also the operator of the first brewery in Georgia, producing beer for Oglethorpe's troops from the hops he grew on the island. The house changed hands over generations. It survived the Revolutionary War. It survived the Civil War when Union troops occupied Jekyll Island. It outlasted every owner who ever tried to make something permanent on this barrier island. Today, Horton House stands alone in a clearing on the southern tip of Jekyll Island, its tabby walls intact, its windows open to the salt air, its interior empty. The National Park Service lists it. Georgia's Historic Preservation Office has documented it, and almost every tourist who comes to Jekyll Island for the beach spends 0 time at the oldest building in the state, standing alone in the marsh, having outlasted everything around it by 250 years. Number 5. Briarcliff Mansion, Candler Estate, Atlanta, the Coca-Cola Heir's haunted asylum. In the Druid Hills neighborhood of Atlanta, on a campus now owned by Emory University, there's a mansion that has been called one of the most haunted buildings in Georgia for 70 years. It was built in 1921 by Asa Griggs Candler Jr., son of the man who founded the Coca-Cola Company as a private estate. The younger Candler was eccentric even by Atlanta standards. He kept a private zoo on the property with exotic animals, threw enormous parties, and spent money with the particular recklessness of someone who inherited wealth they hadn't earned. The estate had a solarium, a music room with over 1,700 square feet of space, a ballroom, and grounds that stretched across a Druid Hills hilltop. Then, the money ran out, or rather, Candler's access to it did. The estate was eventually sold. In 1939, it became a rehabilitation facility. In 1959, it became a mental institution called Briarcliff, which operated until 1997. For 58 years, the Grand Ballroom and the Music Room hosted psychiatric patients instead of Atlanta Society. When the mental institution closed, Emory acquired the property. They've used it occasionally as a filming location. Its decaying grandeur photographs well for productions needing a certain Southern Gothic atmosphere. The building itself is not open to the public. The interior is described as crumbling plaster falling, floors weakened, the solarium overtaken by vegetation growing through the glass. Locals have been telling stories about Briarcliff for decades. The years as a psychiatric facility generated the kind of institutional legends that attach to these buildings and never fully let go. Whether any of them are true is beside the point. The mansion sits on its Druid Hills hilltop, visible from the road, deteriorating behind Emory's fences, its history accumulated in layers that are difficult to separate from the myths that grew over them. Number 4. Atlanta Prison Farm, Fulton County, the prison that burned and nobody came to save. On the west side of Atlanta, surrounded by a city that has grown enormously around it, there's a sprawling campus of abandoned buildings that the Atlanta Prison Farm left behind when it closed in 1995. The farm was established in the early 20th century as a self-sustaining correctional facility, meaning inmates grew the food that fed themselves and other city institutions. It operated for over 80 years, and for most of that time it operated in near-complete obscurity. When it closed, the buildings were simply left. In 2009, a fire broke out in the abandoned complex. The Atlanta Fire Department responded, and then, making a calculation that has never been fully explained publicly, stood down and let the structures burn. The buildings were too deteriorated to safely enter, too toxic with decades of chemical and asbestos contamination, too expensive to demolish properly. The fire did the work instead. What remains is a hybrid. Some buildings burned to their foundations, others still standing with graffiti covering every wall, vegetation climbing through the windows, and the particular atmosphere of a place with a history that nobody officially wants to discuss. Urban explorers have documented the site extensively. Every year, the city considers what to do with it. Every year, nothing definitive is decided. The prison farm sits on increasingly valuable Atlanta real estate, waiting for a decision that hasn't come yet. Number 3. New Manchester Mill, Sweetwater Creek State Park. The mill Sherman burned that refused to fully die. In Lithia Springs, 20 miles west of Atlanta, a trail leads down to the banks of Sweetwater Creek. At the bottom, standing on the water's edge, are the ruins of a 5-story textile mill, its stone walls still 40 feet tall in places, its windows now framing nothing but sky and forest. This is all that's left of New Manchester. In 1849, a mill was built on Sweetwater Creek to produce cotton yarn and cloth. A full mill village grew around it, company housing for the workers, most of whom were women and children. By the Civil War, the mill was producing fabric for Confederate uniforms, which made it a military target. On July 9, 1864, as Sherman's army pushed toward Atlanta, Union cavalry arrived at New Manchester. They burned the mill. They arrested the women and children who worked there and lived in the village, 400 of them, and marched them north to Marietta. From Marietta, they were loaded onto trains and shipped to Indiana and Kentucky as refugees. Most never returned to Georgia. The village was left empty and burned. The stone walls of the mill were too substantial to fully destroy. They're still standing 160 years later, 5 stories of hand-cut stone rising from the creek bank, exactly where they were when Sherman's cavalry rode away. Sweetwater Creek State Park was built around them. A trail leads you directly to the ruins. On weekends, families hike past. Children climb on the stones. Most of them have no idea that 400 women and children were arrested here and forced onto trains headed north, that what looks like a picturesque ruin was the site of one of the largest civilian displacements in Georgia's Civil War history. Number 2. Central State Hospital, Milledgeville. The largest mental hospital on earth, with 25,000 unmarked graves. For most of the 20th century, If a Georgian misbehaved, if a child was difficult, if a woman was inconvenient, if a veteran came home from the war with wounds that wouldn't heal in ways people could see, there was a threat that parents and husbands and authorities levied with quiet regularity. Keep it up and you'll end up in Milledgeville. Milledgeville meant Central State Hospital. And for the people who ended up there, the threat was not empty. Central State Hospital opened in 1842 as the Georgia State Lunatic, Idiot, and Epileptic Asylum. By the 1960s, it had grown into the largest mental institution in the entire world. 12,000 patients, 200 buildings, 8,000 acres, a self-contained campus with its own farms, its own laundry facilities, its own kitchen that was the largest in the world, its own railroad spur to bring in supplies. An entire city built for the people Georgia didn't know what else to do with. Men committed their wives for unusual behavior. Families committed relatives whose sexuality or unconventional thinking made them socially inconvenient. Veterans with what we would now recognize as PTSD were committed indefinitely. Patients were segregated by race. Shock therapy was administered on an assembly line basis. Patients processed in groups, shocked, walked back to the ward in a stupor by nurses. 125 lobotomies were performed. An Atlanta Constitution reporter named Jack Nelson won a Pulitzer Prize in 1960 for documenting the abuses. One nurse performing surgery without supervision, staff drunk on duty, experimental drugs given to patients without consent. The grimmest fact about Central State is not the abuse, it's the fields. Around the campus, what appears to be pastoral rolling Georgia countryside is actually a massive unmarked graveyard. Over 25,000 patients died at Central State over its history. Many were buried in numbered plots, iron markers with identification numbers instead of names, because families had often abandoned patients entirely and could not be located to arrange proper burials. In 1938, construction crews dug up an existing cemetery to make room for a new building. The remains, long decomposed, the coffins disintegrated, were placed in small boxes, moved and reburied in tighter rows. Today, Central State still operates at a fraction of its former capacity, about 200 patients on roughly 2,000 acres. The rest of the campus is partially open for guided trolley tours. The Powell Building, the grand domed administration building, has been stabilized. The Jones Building, a massive 1929 structure, stands partially empty. Security patrols to keep urban explorers out of the deteriorating wards. Walk the trolley tour at Central State, and you'll see 200 buildings in varying states of decay on grounds where the grass grows over what is underneath without announcing what that is. The fields look peaceful. They have always looked peaceful. That is exactly the problem. Number 1. Dungeness Ruins, Cumberland Island. The Carnegie Mansion. That wild horses guard off the southernmost coast of Georgia, accessible only by ferry from the town of St. Mary's, there is an island that time has treated with extreme inconsistency. Some of Cumberland Island looks exactly as it has for 10,000 years. Undeveloped barrier island, sea turtle nesting beaches, maritime forest so dense it blocks the sky. And some of Cumberland Island looks like a dream that burned down. In 1884, Thomas Carnegie, younger brother of steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, began construction of a 59-room mansion on the southern end of the island. He named it Dungeness, after a name that had belonged to a hunting lodge here since 1736, when General Oglethorpe built the first structure on this ground. Carnegie's Dungeness was something else entirely. An indoor pool, squash courts, a golf course, quarters for 200 servants, and a mansion so large that Lucy Carnegie, after her husband died of typhoid fever before the house was even finished, chose to complete it and raise their 9 children there permanently. The Carnegies owned most of Cumberland Island. Lucy had additional estates built on the island for her grown children: Grayfield, Plum Orchard, Stafford Plantation. For decades, the family used the island as their private domain, accessible to virtually no one else. Then, the money thinned. The Depression changed everything. The Carnegie children inherited a property they could neither afford to maintain nor legally sell. Their mother's will bound them to the island. Building by building, the estate fell into disrepair. By 1959, Dungeness was vacant and deteriorating. In that year, a fire, believed by most historians to be arson, though no one was ever charged, gutted the mansion. The roof collapsed, the interior burned. The 4-story walls were left standing. The National Park Service acquired Cumberland Island in 1972 and established it as a national seashore. The ruins of Dungeness were preserved as they stood, roofless walls, empty windows, the remains of a fountain in the overgrown garden, outbuildings of tabby slowly dissolving into the island's soil. And the wild horses came. Cumberland Island has been home to a population of feral horses for centuries, descendants of horses brought by the Spanish in the 1500s, or possibly by the early English settlers or by the Carnegies themselves. Nobody is entirely certain of their origin. They roam the entire island freely, grazing on the salt marshes, walking the beaches, wandering through the ruins of Dungeness as if they own it. Because at this point, functionally, they do. Today, the ferry from St. Mary's carries visitors to Cumberland Island, limited numbers by National Park Service reservation. The walk from the ferry dock to the Dungeness ruins takes you through maritime forest that hasn't been cleared in decades. When the ruins appear through the trees, the 4 stories of roofless Carnegie walls rising from the overgrowth, a horse standing in what was once the garden, the tabby outbuildings dissolving back into the island earth, it is one of the most quietly astonishing sights in Georgia. A family built an empire on this island. The empire burned, the horses stayed, and the island, patient and indifferent to all of it, keeps doing what barrier islands do, shifting, eroding, changing shape, swallowing the evidence that anyone was ever here. Come back in 1,000 years and there will be no sign of the Carnegies. The horses will still be here. 10 places. A battlefield cemetery where most of the names are missing. A mill town still figuring out what it is without its mill. A pre-Columbian city abandoned before Europeans arrived. An amphitheater being reclaimed by the coastal forest. The oldest building in Georgia standing alone in the salt marsh. A Coca-Cola Heir's mansion that became an asylum. A prison the city let burn because dealing with it was too complicated. A Civil War mill whose walls outlasted everything Sherman tried to do to it. The largest mental institution in the world, with 25,000 people buried in the fields around it. And a Carnegie mansion on a barrier island that the wild horses have taken back. Georgia doesn't look like a state with secrets. It looks like front porches and sweet tea and football on Saturdays. The secrets are in the Spanish moss. They're under the pastoral fields of Milledgeville. They're on an island you can only reach by ferry, where the walls of a 59-room mansion stand roofless in the salt air and the horses walk through what was once the garden. If this video made you see Georgia differently, share it with someone who needs to see it. Drop a comment and tell us which of these places you'd most want to visit. We'll see you in the next one.